Have you ever looked up at the sky and wondered who or what the hell is out there?
In fact, NASA estimates the number of stars in our Milky Way Galaxy alone topping the hundreds of billions. And out of those billions of stars attached with billions of planets, 300 million of these worlds are said to be in the habitable zones of these distant suns. So why this brief astronomy lesson? Well, throughout our existence, humans have encountered otherworldly creatures, which have been met with both positive and even sometimes negative experiences. From aliens sticking probes up our asses, to aliens creating humans as slaves to harvest gold on Earth. The theories surrounding the alien race known as the Greys are frightening to say the least. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to theScotch. Cover your buttholes.
And these scary aliens wanted to operate on me.
As we explore this question, who are the Greys? Deep in the caves of Charma, India, lies an early painting etched into the walls depicting these so-called grey beings. To the ancients of India, they were known as the Rohilla people, or the small-sized ones, who would come down to Earth from space in a flying circular object, which would also be depicted in one of these paintings. These petroglyphs are said to be dated back 10,000 years ago, and if you look closely, you notice the typical grey alien figure: big cranium, elongated neck, and small bodies. Similar paintings can be seen 8,000 miles away in various North American caves, and numerous rock carvings that suggest Native Americans interacted with these extraterrestrial beings. Most Native Americans referred to these humanoids as star people, who are often seen as being benevolent, as they would bring gifts like maps of the galaxy and life-changing knowledge of the Earth and cosmos to these ancient tribes. Many archaeologists and historians suggest these rock carvings depict ghosts, spirits, or other interdimensional beings. Stories from the Hopi tribe of northeastern Arizona suggest these spirits were actually flesh and blood star people known as the Kachina, who are not space gods, but the Watchers of Earth. While these star people seem to have had a positive influence on our ancient brothers and sisters, thousands upon thousands of years later the narrative would be flipped, suggesting these humanoid beings as heartless, inhumane creatures. Let's take a huge leap from ancient rock paintings to the Greys many of us know and love. Starting with an event that happened in 1897 in Aurora, Texas, where the town even had a funeral for the pilot of this craft. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning where residents of Aurora noticed flying machinery traveling at speeds of about 10 to 12 miles an hour. As it gradually settled towards Earth, it flew right above the town square and crashed into Judge Proctor's windmill and water tank, with debris even destroying his garden. In fact, the article written for the Dallas Morning News by author S.E. Hayden even went as far as to state that the pilot of the ship is supposed to have been the only one on board, and while his remains are badly disfigured, enough of the original has been picked up to show that he was not an inhabitant of this world. Papers found on his person, evidently the record of his travels, are written in some unknown hieroglyphics and cannot be deciphered. The ship was too badly wrecked to form any conclusion. It was built of unknown metal, resembling somewhat a mixture of aluminum and silver. The pilot's funeral will take place at noon tomorrow. While the Time magazine article in 1979 would state that Hayden's article was generally ridiculed at the time, and most citizens of Aurora still scoff. Hayden wrote it as a joke and to bring interest to Aurora. I can't f***ing say that name. Hayden wrote it as a joke and to bring interest to Aurora. Hayden wrote it as a joke and to bring interest to Aurora. Hayden wrote it as a joke and to bring interest to Aurora. I'm sorry, I can't say that name. Though no one will ever know the truth behind this UFO, it's interesting to note that the Aurora Cemetery plaque speaks of the legend of the fallen pilot. So, what the hell are you talking about, man? Well, don't worry, I'm getting there. Be patient, young Padawan. Alright, I'll hop around to the good stuff.
I like to hot all day.
To the more familiar stuff. And as we fly over Aleister Crowley's encounter with Lamb, we land our flying saucers into the lands of Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. It was an early morning for rancher William Mack Brazel, but on this particular day in early July 1947, he'd report a wreckage on a ranch near Corona, New Mexico, that would essentially be etched, not in petroglyphs, but into pop culture, and we all know what happened next. Brazel informed Sheriff George Wilcox on July 5th what he'd seen on his uncle's ranch. The sheriff called the Roswell Army Airfield, who then assigned the case to Major Jesse Marcel. Not only would the major find a field of debris of unknown material,
I tried to make a dent in this metal. He says, you can't bend it. You can't make a mark on it. He says, I took a sledgehammer and whammed it. I put it on the ground and whammed it. The sledgehammer bounced off of it.
That night, he brought the evidence home where he and his family noticed purple hieroglyphics on the recovered material.
Anything else unusual about this particular piece of material?
Well, the most unusual part of this whole thing was what was on the I-beam, on the inner surface of the I-beam. There appeared to be a type of writing on the mainframe itself. I don't recall seeing any lines or letters of any kind, but it was more like geometric shapes.
On the 8th of July, the famous newspaper article would be released stating they had found a flying saucer, with the next day saying it was a weather balloon. But what does this have to do with grays? That's right, folks. It is said the Roswell crash held more than just weather balloon fragments, but also alien bodies whose description resembles those of the grays. Interestingly enough, what were these beings doing here to begin with? The Roswell crash ultimately inspired filmmakers to create movies with aliens and flying saucers. There were many of these types of films, like It Came from Outer Space, released in 1953, Earth vs. Flying Saucers, released in 1956,
The Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
Ross, it was a saucer. A flying saucer?
Well, we saw what appeared to be a flying saucer. That's all we can say.
and even Invasion of the Saucermen, released in 1957, with the cover of that movie portraying small beings resembling the Greys. While there are many other films depicting these spaceships along with aliens, 4 years after the release of the Saucermen, a real-life event would happen that inspired countless others to come forward with their stories. It was on September 19th, 1961, when Barney and his wife Betty Hill drove back home from the Canadian border to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, not knowing they would experience something out of this world. The time was after 10 at night on the scenic US-3, when Betty spotted a distant light to the bottom left of the moon and quickly brushed it off as just being a planet. She had always enjoyed watching the mountainous views of the valley, especially on a moonlit night, and shortly after driving through Lancaster, noticed an even brighter light in the sky that ultimately caught her attention. Now, Betty had her eye on this light for quite some time before telling her husband what she was witnessing, and would eventually tell Barney as the light grew brighter. Trying to find a logical explanation for this light, Barney thought they may have been witnessing a satellite or even a helicopter, to which his logical thinking would change after pulling over to take their restless dog Delcy out for a walk. Betty had grabbed a pair of binoculars to further investigate this mysterious light, and after handing them over to Barney, he concluded that it was just an airplane, as he could see rows of windows. They continued onward back home, before eventually pulling over again a few miles north of Cannon Mountain, confused by this light's erratic movements. Still unconvinced that it was just an airplane,
Barney, that's not a plane, it's still following us.
Betty looked at her binoculars and noticed an almost cigar-shaped object flashing multicolored lights. Now Barney started to realize that he could hear no sounds of a jet engine, and would take another look through the binoculars, and began to feel like this object was observing them.
It's coming closer.
It is not. It is not coming closer. Just way up there. Betty, what are you trying to make me believe?
They drove towards the base of Cannon Mountain, where the object disappeared only to reappear a few hundred feet next to them, to which Betty excitedly yelled for Barney to pull over at Indian Head. They stood in amazement at the sight of this object, which they described as a brightly lit glowing pancake that had 2 rows of windows. Barney even felt a strange impulse to move towards the object that seemed to deafen him, blocking Betty's screams to walk back to their car.
And I try to maintain control so Betty cannot tell I am scared. God, I'm scared.
Barney, now standing 50 feet away from the object, placed the binoculars to his eyes and saw something unforgettable. He could see at least half a dozen living figures wearing black uniforms. They were staring directly at him. Every member of the crew but one stepped back from the window towards a large panel a few feet behind the window line. The remaining one appeared to Barney to be a leader. He remembered the eyes of the one crew member who stared down at him. He had never seen eyes like that before. So what did the Hills witness? Who were these beings staring down at them? The Hills would experience a phenomenon known as missing time, where the loss of time occurs with no explanation about what happened in between that time lost. Now, missing time is very common with abduction cases, and in 1964, through a series of hypnosis sessions with psychiatrist Dr. Benjamin Simon, Barney's recollection of their encounter was frightening to say the least.
Just stay there, he's saying to me. It's pounding in my head. Don't pull the binoculars away. God, give me strength. All right. Pull them down. Run! Pull these binoculars down and run. God! It says, my God, give me strength. I gotta get away. Oh.
He'd explain how he felt these beings were doing an operation on him of some sorts, with his wife Betty adding in a separate hypnosis session that she was also being examined on. Betty would also draw a star map, where she made the claims that these beings were from the Zeta Reticuli star system, which is a wide binary star system in the southern constellation of Reticulum. From the southern hemisphere, the pair can be seen with the naked eye as a double star in very dark skies. While there are several cases before Barney and Betty's incident, the Hill case would bring forth many people sharing their alien abduction stories under hypnosis. And here are just a few of them. In October 1974, Carl Higdon of Wyoming was elk hunting near Medicine Bow National Forest when he encountered a being who went by the name of Osso, where he was eventually examined and deemed unsatisfactory. He'd also claimed to have seen 5 captive humans by this mysterious Osso. A year later, in October of 1975, David Stevens and his friend Glenn of Norway, Maine, were driven off the highway and revealed through hypnosis that he had been undressed, with the beings taking a blood sample from him. Even the famous Travis Walton case a month later in November of 1975 would have Walton's story become a Hollywood film. He had been abducted by these beings for several days while they, you guessed it, examined his body.
I didn't know where I was. The pain and the feeling that I was mortally wounded, something was so wrong inside. I felt like I was dying. And this is what really fueled the panic when I finally laid eyes on these creatures.
Now, many of these abductions were recalled through hypnosis, and according to the Mayo Clinic, hypnosis is a changed state of awareness and increased relaxation that allows for improved focus and concentration. It also is called hypnotherapy. Hypnosis usually is done with the guidance of a healthcare provider using verbal repetition and mental images. During hypnosis, most people feel calm and relaxed. Hypnosis typically makes people more open to suggestions about behavior changes. It can help you gain control over behaviors you'd like to change. It may help you cope better with anxiety or pain. Although you're more open to suggestion during hypnosis, you don't lose control over your behavior during a hypnosis session. Right, Barney? While hypnotherapy seems to be proven effective for most, the point about abductions is this: are they friendly or hostile? So, what the hell or who the hell are these beings? Why the abductions? Are they really from a binary star system? Or humans from the future to warn us about our self-destruction? Well, folks, the theories are even wilder than you'd imagine. Many believe these greys abduct humans and use their DNA to create hybrid greys. For what is beyond me. Others believe they are simply explorers from distant planets who are here for research, while others suggest greys are actually robots, and others suggest they only have one organ, Many also believe, whether robot or not, these greys have been manufactured by a far more superior race for planetary or human research. There are even stories of greys creating a treaty with the US military where they would hand over alien technology in exchange for abducting humans for research. Many of these abductees even find some sort of implant left by these humanoids. The extent of their purpose is still left unknown. Now, what do I think? Well, there are many similar characteristics between these abduction stories, or in general, visitation stories. Number 1, these beings are sometimes unsuccessful with their mission, and they crash land on Earth, which brings me to point number 2. The fact these beings crash after supposedly having the gravity-bending technology gives off vibes of a robotic malfunction, not from the spaceship, but from these bioengineered entities. 3. I also believe these beings may have been visiting Earth since the beginning of time, and their stories and technology have somehow been lost through time. Which brings me to my final point. Are they friends or foes? The fact these abductees seem to have forgotten these experiences tells me they've had their memory wiped. The fact they essentially get kidnapped is proof these beings either don't have feelings, hence robots, or they simply don't care to traumatize their victims, hence foe. The truth of the matter is, none of us will ever know whether or not these stories are true or complete fabrications. Were Barney and Betty Hill and many of these abductees remembering things they had actually seen in the movies, or experiences they had actually witnessed? These stories about the greys have to be taken with a huge grain of salt, and unless disclosure happens, or we get absolute evidence of their existence, the story of these grey beings will be left with more theories than answers.